Did you ever wonder if there was something you could do to understand what perspective camera was, and if you could make it more professional in Blender? There is an entire world of more professional appearances inside of Blender, and I dare say it's right at your fingertips and you may not have ever used it before. On the left, we have the perspective camera with the render border coming out of a camera, which is straight from Blender, and the 3D view in the background. This is not rendered, it is simply solid view, and I can change it to material view and it gets bright white. But you'll notice that the blocks in the background line up from the 3D view to the camera view. Over on the right hand side, this is a rendered view that I'm rendering very quickly in preview mode, and the blocks in back do not match the blocks up front. And as a matter of fact, unlike a perspective view with vanishing points on the horizon, the blocks up front appear to bend a little bit at the top of the screen. If you're wondering how to get a more professional camera with a slight bit of barrel distortion, which is something that a lot of people use post to try to fudge in to their animations and images, this very simple Blender usage is the video for you, so that you don't have to do it in post. You just go ahead and do it as you're working. This might be the video for you because it stops things from being ordinary. So follow along, stay tuned, it's very simple. Hello, hi, hola. That is my handle and my greeting. Blender 2.79. I'm just going to go ahead and get everything reloaded here from the beginning. A standard Blender scene, and you probably have a cube stuck in yours. Well, let's get rid of the cube. I've been working on this for quite a bit, and so some of my recent files include this. These characters here are little guys I've been using to try to block in better stories, and I'm using them as proxy characters, and so I can move them here and there and position them. I was going to make a video, but it turned out to be like 2.5 hours of me talking about how to make these things, and what I really wanted to do was show you how to use these things. But another way to use them is to go ahead and change the camera for Blender. Now, you're familiar with orthographic view, which compresses everything and gets rid of all perspective. Everything just sits right on top of everything else. Now, if we go ahead and use a perspective camera, we have these guys who are exactly the same size as they used to be here, but because a perspective camera goes to a vanishing point out on the horizon, it looks as though we're looking through a camera. The thing is, that camera, let me see if I can do this quickly here, I'm right-clicking the render border, because if you're enabled the layer with your camera, you can right-click the render border and get access to the data tab of your camera. If you're not on that layer where your camera is, you right click the render border and nothing happens. So you have to have your camera's layer enabled in order to do that. It's simple, but it could be confusing if you're early to Blender and you're wondering, I see the render border, but I can't seem to right click the render border. You have to have your camera's layer enabled. Here we have a perspective camera. It has a focal length of 35 millimeters, or a field of view that equals 49.1 degrees. I wondered about that, because a perspective viewing software, does the focal length really matter? Because in photography, the wider the angle, the shorter the focal length tends to be, and the more you get a barrel distortion. Now, try as you will, you can't get a barrel distortion. You just make everything kind of zoom out to their vanishing points. And what you really do is increase your field of view. And eventually you end up at, I guess, 173. And this was something that I thought resulted in plain, ordinary, all of us making the same result, vanishing points, where you could use a ruler and draw straight across these guys, and in rendered view you could use a ruler and draw straight across these guys, And I didn't want that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to knock a lot of my settings down here so we don't bounce around so much. Like 0, for example. Okay, so that hurries it up. As far as viewport, what's it called? Making a more efficient preview. And also, if you don't know, sometimes you have your preview set to 25 and it stops at 25. But if you roll your preview down to 0, your path tracing samples or what have you keep climbing until the end of time or it's time to buy a new computer. I prefer that. Now, real cameras, barrel distortion. So easy. But you can't see it in the 3D view, which is the bright white thing over here. Now it's the weird Adobe orange thing. Click on panoramic. Alright, so it started out at 10.5 with a field of view of 180. Okay, this really is the scene. And I have some point lights sitting up here, red, blue, green, just casting some extra light. I don't really need them, do I? Because it kind of confuses what comes next. I'm so happy to see barrel distortion. But how on earth can you make this usable for you? Oh, and I have activated my thirds. Can you see that? My camera also has composition guides, and I've activated thirds, just to give myself a reminder of where things could go. Let's put in thirds. With this enabled, I can adjust the field of view, but the problem is, all it seems to do is just shrink this circle. In virtual reality, I've seen on the boxes a lot of advertisements that say 120-degree field of view for virtual reality visors. Is that really useful? Can we see 120 degrees of view anyway? Change the lens. Never do most photographers use a 10.5 millimeter lens. I mean, that's like really intense. The 35 that is default is also a little uncommon. We use 35 millimeter film, which is the diagonal of the negative, but very rarely do we use a 35 millimeter lens. They're both measured in millimeters, but they're measuring two different things. Your neck size might be 14 or 16 or 17, but that is in inches, but it doesn't mean you're only 14, 16, or 17 inches tall. It just happens to be the same unit of measure, but it's measuring two different things. So the lens of 35 millimeters is typically, like in high school, you're typically using a 50 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter camera. Now let's look at that field of view, can we? I'll make this bigger because I just love sliding these windows around. Wow, that's so silly when it's big. Here's 120. If I change this to 115 and you say you can see a difference, you're wrong. If I change it to 50, still no difference, because the render border is within the field of view. You may remember a moment ago that it was actually 41 something. In perspective view, we shifted from 35 millimeters to a field of view, and it was 39 something. So 42 and 43 for the panoramic in fisheye equisolid, we have several choices. 42 degrees still gives you a full edge-to-edge render of this image, and it includes that barrel distortion. You could see the curve at the top. It's ever so slight, but ever so important. Music videos, TV commercials, TV shows, movies, if they use real glass lenses, those which don't cost tens of thousands of dollars include the barrel distortion, where straight lines get rounded towards the edge. You can purchase very expensive lenses, and they are manufactured to compensate for barrel distortion. Real estate agents hire photographers with very expensive lenses, so the wide angle, which would mean something like a 23 millimeter lens, so the wide angle lens doesn't include the barrel distortion because it's so well made that it compensates. Boy, look at that field of view. Pump, pump, up, 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 so I can get those corners. 95 degrees. Now here you really see it on the edge of my setting here. One reason is because subconsciously, one reason to use this is because subconsciously people watching your animations or viewing your still images almost expect this weird distortion on the side. Without that weird distortion, everything is so straight that it looks like a ruler and a pen on a piece of paper. When that distortion is included but perhaps minimized, and we can type in 70, which is a good lens, I can type in 50. But here's something I noticed. Let's go back to that default of 10.5 and 180, which is just as superfluous on the side. If I try to scroll this up to 50 by clicking and dragging on the type lens field, I only get to 15, and then it's as though I can't go any further. You can type things in. There's 99, and now I can go 99.100. I can't even type in above 100. This is one of those dark Easter eggs that the Blender developers have hidden for us inside the brilliant software of Blender. I think I had this set up for 50 millimeters, and a field of view I really didn't even pay much attention to because, like I said, it's super. Camera presets. If you go crazy and you lose where you came from, the start was Blender, even though it said something else here. It said like select one. The start was Blender, and then 32 and auto. So you'll see that I've really bungled up my my 3D view, but this render preview is now back to normal, and that's kind of funny because I don't know why my 3D view is so weird. I guess that's funny in some universe. Haha. Let me give Blender a break. Holy fun. Oh, there it is. I don't know. Ooh, that's good looking. I think that might be my new logo. And it definitely means I know what I'm talking about. What is that? Object mode, go into edit, open a recent file, stuff. Shall we? I'm so glad that happened on something I saved. Wow. Yeah, man. So those lights were on 4. Unbelievable. Good times. Good times. It's so nice to have you along. I was just explaining exactly what I wanted to explain. Let's do a render. F11, slot 1, F12. Oh, and it's tiny. My render tiles are tiny because I do this on a computer without a graphics card capable, so I have to use the central processing unit, which really appreciates smaller tile sizes. And something weird is about to happen. Boom! Because there's a final bit that I want to have for you. Oh, what is all this? I've been working hard. Let's just go image to image, shall we? The render image is this. It includes the barrel distortion, but it doesn't have the second part, which is called chromatic aberration. Anytime you bend light, you separate the elements of white light. Red, green, blue, and everything in between. So I was just sort of tinkering around and really not doing anything in the way of science, just to play around with vignetting. I have a vignette filter that I had to create. Should I really go through this? I mean, it's like kind of messy, isn't it? I had some interesting problems with this, and arguably I'm still having some interesting problems with this. I don't know if it's just me, but using this perspective camera, the default for this is something crazy. When you plug in the defocus node between your image and your composite, you get some like real madness. Let me close this thing. Just that backdrop, please. Knock it off. You get the appearance of, well, nothing. And you swear you've done everything right, so then you decide, all right, well, I'm just going to kick my f-stop down to like ridiculously low numbers. And good for you, you do it, and it's done. And then you say, well, the max blur is obviously all screwy because everything is chewed up and strange and background is bleeding. And so then I want to raise my threshold, and you start raising your threshold. And you raise your threshold again, and everything, it's like a little bit confusing. And then you look at things that are supposed to be blurry, and it's not quite blurry, so you start raising things, but now your bleed is a little bizarre. Here, like this guy should be out of focus, but he's like having a real caffeine attack here. Here's what's happened. Preview. A low quality mode. And you cannot adjust this in preview because you'll just go nuts adjusting the wrong things. Take off preview. So, the next step, or perhaps the only step if you want to ignore defocus, is to do something called lens distortion dispersion. Dispersion is where the chromatic aberration begins to occur. The hive mind that created Blender has projector, jitter, and fit. And when you mouse over, each actually has a pretty good description. And that's where chromatic aberration hides, in dispersion. You know what, maybe I'll do 0.015 and split the difference. There it is, with the blur. So you know what, I'll just stop it with the blur. Enough blur. I then mixed. Is that right? Yep. I then mixed this image with a copy of itself that was darker. It's kind of a technique I enjoy using. Mixing it with the copy of itself that's darker. Now mixing those together happens with a color mix node. So how do they mix? Let's see this ridiculous backdrop. Yay! Okay, how do they mix? There's something called an ellipse mask. That ellipse mask is exactly what it sounds like. It could be a circle or it could be an oval. The oval could be horizontal, or you can just use horizontal measurements but rotate it to be vertical. Well, I did this. And I did, turns out I just, how did I arrive at these numbers? 0.1 means the entire, 1.0 means the entire width. God, I really don't want to forget those numbers. 0.72, because I did it based on aesthetics, but it was a long couple minutes. And so a 1.0, gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. What was it, 405? Means also the width going vertically along the y-axis. But we don't really want that, do we? Gosh, was that right? That looks right. And so I just kept cutting it back until it was this nice thing. And then I knew that I wanted its output to be blurred in a Gaussian manner. And so these numbers, I think, start at 1 or 0, which is like, guess what? Nothing. Here's a 1, okay? I'm not sure. So I can click and drag over X and Y and then drag my mouse up to ridiculous numbers. And I think 157 was where I ended up. Doesn't have to be. You can do whatever. And I did this, like that's a little bit less than 157, isn't it? Let's just go to 160. I used that as the mix factor between the light version and the dark version. And so the result is, oh gosh, how can I do this? Here. This is the result. Vignetting. You see the richness where her shadow lands and sort of this weird reddish. It's not perfect, man. I'm not saying it is, but it's just not bright white. There's now a vignette effect here. Importantly, the ellipse mask has a value. We think that the mix value in a color mix node is from 0 to 1. But dig this. If I put in 2, it actually acts as a multiplier for the white value. And I can dim it down. So this is where Oh, and once again, I can only slide it from 0 to 1, but I can actually plug in different numbers, although I'm not sure where the numbers stop being effective. You know, let's just go for broke. 100. Wow. All right. Glad I learned that. Oh, look at that. Anyway, that is the art and science of Blender, and it all... Woo! Can I do this quick? It all gets back to changing your camera. For Pete's sake, we all love what you do. When you use a panoramic, fisheye, equi-solid camera that is somewhere between 35 and 100 millimeters for its focal length, just make sure that your field of view lets us see it, but you don't have to obsess. I love this because it forces people to begin to legitimize the space they're using. Look how far away that camera is, and how well framed these characters are with that camera so far away. And at 70 millimeters, it's even farther. I think this is very important because a lot of people who are using perspective cameras for perspective line art, or orthographic for that matter, the space between objects matters less. When you use a panoramic camera, you really have to pay more attention to your lighting solutions, you have to pay more attention to the blocking of characters and objects, and you have to pay more attention to the location of the camera and the size of your set designs. And if you're used to putting your camera way up close, let's see if I can make this happen at all. If you're used to putting your camera way up close and having everyone in frame in sort of this crazy, impossible shortcut just to present things, then what you'll end up with, I've got to stop those lights, what you'll end up with is more barrel distortion because you're using a wider angle lens. Maybe that's intriguing to you, maybe it's not. For me, it adds a lot more excitement, realism to your images and to your renders, and you can see how offset the legs are on these characters. The one in the middle is, aligned horizontally, so it's less obvious to see, but that's why I put in the blocks at the top and the feet down at the bottom here. You can see how it begins to pinch, and you're less able to use a ruler to tie this image together. Use your compositional grids in your render view so that you begin to put things in the middle or on the golden this and that, and your thirds and your diagonals and your crisscrosses, whatever you like, because it will really make more professional, even more stylized, playful animations. It adds a lot of cohesion visually. Woo! All right, so that's my word bank for the day. I just spent it all right there. I want you to succeed, and I want to see what you're making. I really appreciate your comments and your likes and your subscriptions. And I promise you, the day is coming. The day is coming where I will show you a little bit about these guys here, because they're posable. They're really good stand-ins for things like this. And case in point, if you're using a camera that mimics real life conditions or more closely approximates real cameras, it's more important to have kind of a figure stand-in dummy like this that you can bend and pose and do all sorts of things with, so that you're not wasting computation time with a full rendered version of your character. And if you don't yet have a full rendered version of your character, like me, these guys will at least give you the opportunity to start telling your story while you look online and examine how to make a more fully designed character. That's why I made them, but the tutorial just ran way too long. All right, thanks again for everything, and most of all, thanks for watching.